Okay. Trustee Bree. Here. Trustee Hallwax. Here. Trustee Rubin. Here. All present.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve, or if there's any, oh, wait, first public comment.
There's no.
Any public comments? All right, can I have a motion to approve the minutes, or are there any adjustments from last month?
Second.
All in favor?
All
All right. Okay, thank you. You want to take us through the financial reports?
Alright, so we'll start with September's treasurer's report. With brief CIP update, and then we have a full financial forecast included in the packet. So included in the packet are financials for the month of September. We have continued the good news of strong revenue performance. Our state income tax, sales taxes, utility taxes have all continued to be higher than last year, and strong performance as compared to budget. Our building permit revenue made a strong comeback this month. We have 3 new homes, 3 additions, and some significant interior remodels that flip that revenue from a lagging perspective to all of a sudden higher than last year and more than budget. So that's good news as well. We did know that those permits were kind of in the hopper, but they crossed the finish line in the month of September. The only exception to our good news story is property taxes. We're now hitting the point in the year that we are lower than last year. At this time, the month of September last year, we were already getting property tax distributions. So we are starting to see that impact away from Cook County. We are anticipating that we'll draw down reserves about $4.7 million before we start to receive property tax distributions. So that is a significant drawdown, but we are still hopeful that the county will issue bills in December, or that they will be due by December 31st.
Can I have, this is a little bit of a digression. It's not financial reports related, but it reminded me. On building permits, I've had several people complain about the process. And whether it's HR Green or the interface between them and the village, it seems as if it's getting worse from what it was when we first engaged HR Green. HR, right?
Yeah.
Right. And it's a little bit opaque as far as where the process stands for people who are applying for permits. And so I just heard from several that it is taking much longer, and they've been, information is getting requested multiple times for the same stuff. And so I don't know where the problem lies. It seems like it's relatively new compared to where we were a year ago. So something may have changed, whether they're understaffed or.
Well, there are some issues, and we're working through them. One of them is we are in the process of transitioning into the new ERP modules for permit management, and we've made note of the fact that there's been some issues. We're working through process. We also brought on a new person in the permit coordinator role who's getting up to speed. I think when she's up to speed, she's fantastic, but when she's fully up to speed, we'll be in a better situation. We'll talk through that a bit in the budget process next month with some ideas that we want to move forward with.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
But the feedback is duly noted and
Come up
appreciated.
a few times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
And despite our recent vacancy in downtown, our places for eating actually still remains well. Waterfront side, our volumetric revenues continue to be lower than last year. If you remember last summer, we had severe drought-like conditions that led to very high revenue. We're still within budgetary targets, but we are lagging last year. The fixed charge revenue is on the flip side, it's higher than last year, but just slightly lower than budgetary targets. Other items of note, our sales taxes, this is the 3rd year in or third month in a row that we're seeing a decline as compared to last year. We're not seeing a decline from month to month necessarily, but the numbers are slightly lower than this time last year. So this is something we have to continue to watch. We are still seeing strong sales tax performance in autos, clothing, and home delivery services like HelloFresh, the food delivered to your home, those types of services, as well as liquor delivered to the home, so wine subscriptions and things like that. So those are kind of at all-time highs compared to our historic revenue. But this is something that we'll continue to watch, especially as we start to look at revenue projections for next year. I don't think we're at an alarming spot yet, but it is something that we need to just note.
That, it could be coincidence, it could be something else, but it does line up with when a restaurant closed in town. Which may or may not be related.
Overall, the general fund projections, we are expecting general fund revenue to finish the year at $930,000 over budget. That's just on the revenue side. And then the water fund is projected at 1.2 million over budget, just on the revenue side. The water fund will end this year very strong. As you probably recall, we just rejected declined to move forward with the water main project because it came in so high. So because that planned expenditure will not happen this year, and that was a large expenditure, the water fund will be in really good shape as we head into this year.
I don't want to be a pig, but is there any way to take that table back to 2019 for an upcoming meeting? It's certainly not urgent, but I think it'd be good to see that kind of pre-COVID and COVID through now, just to kind of have a different view. As long as it's not too much work.
We have those numbers.
That was all, wasn't that also before you started collecting, locally for
Yes.
what people have from Amazon and things like that?
Right, so it'd be interesting view.
Yeah, I think it would give us a good perspective on kind of perhaps what the new normal, maybe given that,
Yeah.
that legislative change.
Just a few notes on our local economic pressures. We are continuing to see supply chain disruptions. The order that we had in place for our 2 public safety squads this year was canceled. So we will not receive those 2 vehicles. You'll see that come back before you as part of the budget process. Our public works department is still waiting on a leaf vacuum that was ordered in January. We're still hopeful that we will get it this year, holding out hope as the leaves are starting to fall. It'd be really great if we got that now. The golf club is also experiencing upward pressure on projects. We're seeing a 20% increase in the cart path project. So that's an additional increase that we've seen. We're also starting to see fuel prices creep back up, and we're just continuing to see price increases in raw materials and supply parts. On a year-to-date basis, our commodities are now more than this time last year. Our contractual services are still less than this time last year, but both of these categories are still within our budgetary expectations for the year. So at this point, we're not concerned, but it would be silly not to acknowledge that we are seeing price increases that we do need to plan for as we head into this year's budget.
I don't want a big digression. Do the contracts that we have with Ford on squad cars, are they just allowed to say never mind? I mean, how's that? I'm just curious how that works. I mean, normally, if we agreed to buy these vehicles and we said never mind, they would say, where's the money? How does that work?
That's a good question. Your orders, when you sign off on the orders, have a
It's not necessarily a contract, it's just we place an order through the dealer that is the chosen vendor for the purchasing cooperative. So it's not necessarily a contractual agreement that they.
So if that were actually right, then we could say, they, you know, we could say, yeah, never mind.
I do think we have the ability to cancel the order.
We probably could, we never have.
These are joint bids across the state to set a price on a squad car. And we avail ourselves of that through a joint bidding cooperative. Admittedly, we've never had to cancel, and we've never had one canceled in the past. And so it is a little bit of a new ground for us, but we'll go back and double check through that.
You know,
It's a worthy, I think, as we're looking at the next year's budget, it's an aspect of the changing environment that I'm more curious about, especially since I'm anticipating, bringing contracts or requests for purchases to the board that we would anticipate not receiving in the fiscal year, or even the next fiscal year that the board will approve it for. So we'll double check on that because I'm curious about it too.
there are legal doctrines about the impossibility or force majeure that might enable them to say,
Yeah.
There are no cars, so sorry, it's not our fault. But it's just a little strange. Okay, that's it. Sorry.
Any questions on the treasurer's report? All right, at this point, I will turn it over to Margaret for our CIP update.
Good evening. As you can see, your CIP update for monthly and quarterly is in your packet this evening. Just to quickly go over it, the sanitary sewer improvements for Delaware with main engineering, the leak mapping replacement is Nikki mentioned, and also the residential water main meter replacement, and all are expected to arrive or have been completed in November of 22. We've also had the targets for relocate of the Beach Road storm sewer outfall, patrol vehicle replacements for 650 and 662, which Nikki just mentioned, the public safety kitchen renovation, and then the traffic signal control modifications have all been moved into 2023. Staff is available tonight to answer any of the questions you have about details of those projects.
Included in your packet, page 50 to 68 is the 5-year financial forecast. This includes calendar year 2023 and calendar year through calendar year 2027. Right now in the budget process, our departments are finalizing their formal requests. And we're working on reconciling those with what we are projecting in terms of revenue. But we've updated the 10-year CIP, and we're working on finalizing a draft budget that will be presented to you for final consideration as we talk through the budget process. So all of that information that we have to date has been rolled into the forecast in terms of the expenditures that are being requested for next year, as well as the CIP requests that will be requested over the next 5 years. So still not final, but it's the most up-to-date information that we have right now. So the forecast focuses on the general fund, the water fund, and the motor fuel tax fund. As we've already discussed at length tonight, one of the largest impacts affecting the forecast is rising inflation, supplies, and commodity costs. So those all have escalators within the financial forecast. Also, as Phil just mentioned, supply chain disruptions and logistical challenges. One of the things that we'll be bringing before you to consider in the 2023 budget are some purchases and orders that we may not anticipate receiving in 2023, particularly with equipment and vehicles. Prioritization of infrastructure improvements continues to be a concern and a priority for us in terms of considering budget expenditures and where those dollars will go, and also adjusting for a few future state budgets and any changes that can happen at the state level. The amount of revenue in our general fund that passes through the comptroller's office has risen to 25%, which is kind of a scary number. It's a large percentage of revenue that has to flow through the comptroller's office before it comes to us. So we are very vulnerable in terms of what the state does in their budgets, any potential diversions that might happen. So that's something that we are continuing to watch closely. As we talked about ad nauseum earlier, debt financing of infrastructure needs, and I'll go through that in a moment. of what we're projecting over the next 10 years in terms of referendum versus revenue bonds. And now we all obviously will be rolling the golf club into that as well. Continuing to design fee structures around cost. We took the input from the committee. Last time we talked about water rate revenues, and you'll see in the forecast, we were originally considering an increase at less than what was recommended in the water rate study, and we've kind of bumped that up now. Now that we've had a chance to look at what the 10-year forecast might look like and escalating what we project in terms of CPI increases, we are returning that to a 7% rate increase recommendation, which was in line with what the water rate study was recommending. Just some highlights in the general fund. The forecast does include a 5% rise in the property tax levy. In the general fund alone, that's about a $300,000 impact. We are also recommending sewer fee increases. That's to continue to support capital improvements. Again, the projections out that we have for the next 10 years, particularly with the ICAP program, where we have to inspect our entire system. Was it between now and 2042? I think
20 years, right?
okay, 20 years from now, and then we have to line or correct any issues that we find. So that's been rolled into the forecast as well. We're continuing to negotiate our refuse contract with LRS. Right now, the garbage services collections fee that we have in the budget has a placeholder of a 5% increase. That will ultimately depend on where we land with the refuse contract. For those of you that were here when we outsourced garbage, if you remember, this fee was designed to cover the cost of refuse collection, the impact to our infrastructure, to our roads, to our streets, but also the special collection services that we do. So cleanup day, leaf collection, one of our events.
It's recycling as well as disposal costs.
So what we're seeing is, and we discussed as part of the budget process, especially the cost of leaf collection is going up. So we need to be able to try and cover that or recoup that cost from the general fund. So we are requesting, a fee increase for that. We are seeing telecom tax and use tax declining. We talked about that at length at the finance committee. Those are expected. We're seeing them decline this year, and we're projecting that they'll decline in the out years as well. Utility tax and alarm fees we're predicting to be relatively stable, and sales tax, income taxes, and building permits are projected to have strong performance throughout the forecast, although in the next year, to reference Trustee Bree's comment earlier about a potential recession, I do have a small decrease in income taxes and PPRT, personal property replacement taxes, projected for next year in the event that that may become a reality for us. On the expenditure side in the general fund, we have salaries projected with a 3% COLA. That's just a placeholder right now for non-union employees, but both collective bargaining agreements have agreements for 3% COLAs next year. So we just budgeted at 3% across the board. Salaries are remaining about 75% of our operating expenditures, so that's by far the largest cost, as you would expect from a service organization. Also planning for infrastructure costs with the general fund. We are continuing our policy of drawing down fund balance each year for capital projects. So that will be clearly outlined in the 10-year CIP when we project that or present that to you. And that averages between 1.2 and 2 million per year based off of what our capital needs will be. This is super tiny, and I don't expect you to be able to read it, but it is in the full size is in your packet. Just a couple notes. As we mentioned earlier with sales tax, we're projecting sales tax to be relatively stable. The largest growth areas that we're continuing to see are vehicles, clothing, furniture, and home delivery of food and liquor. The other category here is really tiny to see,
That's
but
page 65. Looking at it.
thank you. That includes all of our miscellaneous permits, licenses, interest earnings, cell tower leases, grant revenue, and other just miscellaneous reimbursements that we have there. Throughout the forecast, we are projecting that fund reserves will remain at or above our fund balance target as of today. As you might remember from our financial policy discussion, we're trying to create that target percentage of operating expenditures for reserves up to a 25% target. Where our goal is to increase that by 1% every year, with the thought process of inflation is increasing our revenues, and hopefully we can get to a point where we have that 25% target. So in the out years, the lowest that the reserve would dip with the projections that we have included would be at 17%, and that's all the way out in 2027. So it's very likely to change between now and then. Obviously, we'll revisit this every year, but for the time being, we are within budgetary targets or within policy targets. On the water fund, a little bit, the recommended rate increase would rise to 7% in 2023. As you might recall from past budget years, both in 2020 and 2022, we skipped our water main replacement program. Both of those were to do the transmission main through the Skokie Lagoon. So our normal replacement program that would happen throughout the community was put on hold. So now we're in a position where we're kind of trying to catch up. So in 2023, the draft budget will include a recommendation to borrow using alternate revenue bonds to fund that infrastructure. So there'll be 1.7 million in water main replacements slotted for 2023, and that would all be funded, I guess, a combination between alternate revenue and fund balance. And because we skipped this year's program and the Skokie Lagoon transmission main was largely funded by ARPA funding, we do have a healthy water fund balance that will help supplement those ARS funds. The good news of the replacement of the transmission main is that we've now pushed the replacement of the elevated tank out to 2035. So that buys us a lot of time in terms of determining how to fund that and the ultimate future of the water system as a whole. This is by far the largest increase that we see in the CIP in water main, and that's evidenced by the most recent bid results that we just saw. We have adjusted all the numbers in the 10-year CIP with what we think will happen with CPI, which again is it's a guess, but it's obviously going up, not down. So we're looking at 16.5 million in water main replacements over the next 10 years.
That also includes mandatory lead service line replacement.
Which is new, new this year. It's really the first year that we're starting to plan for the village's share of that cost. Let's see, just another couple notes here. Talked about rebuilding fund balance. And the remainder of the forecast builds in water rate increase assumptions in accordance with the water rate study. And in 2023, it's hard to see here, but again, it's in the packet. We do have a placeholder in 2023 for 4.3 million in bond proceeds that will come in as revenue in 2023, and that would fund main replacements for the next 3 years. On the motor fuel tax fund side, this is the last year that the village will receive Rebuild Illinois funds. So this was an Illinois Department of Transportation grant program. We received $575,000 roughly over the last 3 years. So that source of revenue will stop in 2023. And then we're going to revert back to our past practice with motor fuel tax, in which we let those funds aggregate, and essentially every 3 years we do a road program that's funded out of MOT. So you'll see in both this year's projected year end for CY 2022, we're taking $700,000 out of MFT and we're supplementing the road program so that those funds are added to referendum dollars, and we're working on a large street program, resurfacing program, and then we will do the same next year. So that 650,000 that's slated for 2023 will be matched up with additional referendum dollars, which will allow us to do a larger street program. So the next scheduled street resurfacing that would come out of MFT wouldn't happen until 2027 when we had enough dollars to sustain that. So you saw a different picture of this chart earlier today. So this chart does not have the Gulf referendum included in it. So we weren't sure where we would land earlier today. Just an overview of our debt portfolio based off of the latest EAV numbers we have, which were a year behind because the county is so far behind in calculating the property taxes. Our debt limit will be 69.5 million in tax year 2021. So that's the maximum that we could borrow if we ever wanted to go that high. Right now, as of today, the village has $26.2 million in outstanding GO debt, and then we also have a $1.9 million loan outstanding with the IEPA. Our current debt payment is about $2.4 million, and adjusted for inflation from 2008, the historic high was closer to $3.4 million in today's dollars. We also have $3.5 million remaining in our limited tax authority. If you remember, in 2019, we used a portion of that to borrow for the Tudor Court project. So that's a little bit smaller than what we would have otherwise, but those dollars are also available for spending without a referendum. And then obviously we have a placeholder for the golf clubhouse replacement, but it's not reflected in this chart. And this is obviously all pending the final CIP review, but what we are essentially planning for here, using the existing CIP numbers that again need to be refined before we will come before you, is issuing alternate revenue bonds in 2023, 26, and 29, and those are all staggered in 3-year increments to allow funding for 3 years at a time. And then issuing GO bonds in 2024 would issue the remainder of the referendum that was approved in 21. So that's within that 5-year window. That would be for $3 million. And then we also have tentative GO bond issues for 27 and 30. So we'll lay all of this out for you in the CIP so you can see the whole picture. But that's just what we're thinking as of right now. The total CIP somewhere up in the middle, we ended up at 52, 53
Just about
million.
53.
So that is what we're looking at for the next 10 years.
One of the things we'll do also, sorry, Nikki, to interrupt. One of the things we're also going to do relative to the budget is to integrate tonight's discussion relative to the clubhouse and overlay that into the overall CIP and budget discussions too. So that's included in everything that we'll talk about, so that it isn't off to the side. It's integrated into that.
Moving on to pension funding, this group has talked a lot about pension funding. We are continuing with the existing policy that the committee landed with based off of the actuarial recommendation. So our contribution next year is just over $2.6 million. As of right now, we still don't have a handle on what savings, if any, we're realizing with the pension consolidation. Those assets were transferred in late May, finished out kind of early June. So we're waiting to see once that portfolio is rebalanced, what we will start to realize in terms of investment savings as a whole. So the forecast just kind of includes investment earnings kind of on a status quo basis, because that's the best that we can do with the data that we have right now. And then we also are forecasting contributions in accordance with the funding policy, which you'll see is going up in the near term, kind of with little dips in there. That will ultimately depend on investment performance, largely investment performance, and particularly wherever the fund lies on December 31st. So we'll hope that the market does well that day.
The question about that, given what the market has done so far this year. You know, if that doesn't pick up between now and the end of the year, wouldn't we expect next year's contribution to be a lot more potentially than the 2026?
2024's contribution.
Okay, but it won't affect 2020, well, it won't affect 23?
We're always a year behind. So when the actuary runs the report, they use census data as of the end of the year. And then they roll that forward for the current year, and that's what is going to attach to the levy. So, well, in our case, as much as we can levy. If we were a home rule community,
Right.
we would take that contribution, just attach it to the levy, and then it would be collected that following year. So we're always kind of chasing a year behind.
And it's also, is it 3 years? It's a rolling average over term.
Right.
It's not just.
Right, no, I get it,
Correct.
it's
So
still,
that is our saving grace, that we still have, because they smooth the investment gains and losses, we still have a little bit of gain in there that will carry us through a little bit. So if we take a big hit this year, at least it'll be lessened.
Okay.
But the contribution will likely still go up.
What is our pension obligation right now?
Our unfunded liability,
Yeah, total input.
I don't know off the top of my head, but we're somewhere in the realm, I think, of 28 million. But I can get you the exact number.
That's good.
So moving on, the last thing I want to just kind of give you an overview on is the property tax levy estimate. Consistent with what we've done in years past, we wanted to review just kind of some estimates for you this evening, and then have the actual tax levy hearing in November, where we could receive comments from the public. We'll do a formal presentation, and then provided that everything is finalized with the budget, the property tax levy itself would be presented for your approval in December. The total levy using the maximum allowable increase is just over $17 million. It's a $470,000 increase from the 2021 tax levy extension. That includes the request from the Glencoe Public Library. What I have included for you tonight for the Glencoe Library is not final. Their board is still discussing it, but they have indicated that they are leaning towards a 5% recommendation as well. We do, when we run the calculation of what we will request for property tax levy, we do include, we use kind of a 10-year average of what we're adding to EAV, because we are allowed to capture that new growth. So it is potentially possible that we would get an increase in the levy that's higher than 5%, but it would only be for that new growth. When we look at the levy as an overall, including the debt service levy, because we're not issuing any debt this year, and the way that our debt is structured, our debt levy is actually going down. So when you look at the overall increase with the village and the library, we're only looking at a 2.8% increase from the 21 levy. So our individual levy lines are going up, but as an overall, it's a 2.8% increase. This chart is in your packet. And again, I apologize, it's really tiny on the screen. But this shows what we extended in 2021, and then what we are proposing in 22, and the equivalent of new EAV that we anticipate we could get. Again, we're running with the best estimates that we have right now because the county's so far behind. So this is our best estimate. And what will happen is ultimately whatever we submit, the county will cut us back in accordance with the property tax extension limit. So what you may notice is the numbers that are included in this proposed tax levy are slightly higher than what we've included in the budget, because every year they cut us back in accordance with the limit. In terms of next steps with the financial forecast, we would incorporate any feedback that we received from the committee today into the draft budget document. The financial forecast will be updated for our final requests of review. And then we would present fee recommendations in November along with the final forecast and the draft budget, all for your consideration as one packet. Happy to answer any questions.
One thing you mentioned was that comptroller, a quarter of our budget goes through state. And our fund balance minimum is 25%. That's not necessarily part of this conversation, but maybe that's worth just bringing up again, just, not that they're gonna go a whole year without payments, but they could go several months and we're seeing it, so might be worth just revisiting, not that we necessarily even need to change it, but just that we, because I didn't realize that much was.
It's grown.
It's grown because sales tax has grown. And that's the scare, that's
It's
what.
the good and the bad.
that's scary.
Yeah.
It used to be closer to 19%, now it's all the way up to 25%.
And that's a maybe, but for sure, it seems, we're running through, what was it, 4.7 million of reserves.
Yeah, well, that's what you.
Just because the county kerfuffle between two elected officials over which we have no control, and we're not getting our money when we normally would, and it'll get delayed again next year, for sure. So the fact that it's 17% is a nice theory, but we would literally be pulling our hair out and wondering where we can beg, borrow, and steal if that's all we have in the bank. The number is silly. It's too low.
Well, yes, I mean, when we get the money, we should balance it. That.
No, yes, it's not
So-
permanent, but the point is, if you
Oh,
didn't
right.
have it in
Right.
reserves, and then when you add in that the state, and gosh only knows what they're gonna do, because the state's bankrupt, in terms of potentially taking money from those that can, it's a little scary. And I'm just saying, it's not like we can go snap our fingers and change it to 75% or something. But I do think that we should keep that in mind as we're thinking about what appropriate level of reserves for this town ought to be.
We have been raising that balance as long as I've been part of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's ever, I mean, it's safe to, so we just have to also
Yeah.
be cognizant of how
Right.
much we've changed. I guess, I don't know if 7 years, short period of time or a long period of time, but
Well, it's a dramatic difference.
yeah,
I
maybe
think, you know, when
one and a
I,
half times more, so.
when I started, it was less than 10%.
Yeah.
And that was very frightening, honestly. So I think we're making good progress. To your point, it is something that we do need to continually evaluate. I think it surprised both Nikki and I how much sales tax has jumped up in our overall revenue scheme. And it's a good thing, right? It's great when times are good, but what you want to be mindful of is when you become dependent upon those resources and then something happens. So it's changed the equation a bit for us.
Is there any downside to growing our reserves?
Just, you can't find it.
Well, yeah.
Well, no, I mean, in terms of, say, what Gary talked about, with the way the state looks at us, is there anything that I don't understand in terms of how the state finances work? That having a reserve that's, you know, X percentage big than a town that's less fortunate would be a hindrance to us.
In some cases, it may be a hindrance when they're considering your eligibility for grant funding.
Yeah.
Like the county program that is the short-term loan
Right.
because they were delaying property taxes. We're not eligible for that because we actually have been responsible to grow our reserves. And then there's also some grant programs that look particularly with communities that are struggling and they get preference over that.
You know, I think it's looked favorably upon by the ratings agencies. That is always something that comes up in those ratings calls that Nikki and I participate on. And I think that's a good thing. We have seen it certainly be used as a bit of a political volleyball at the state level when there were discussions about property tax freezes and income tax freezes for reductions of LGDF. Those statements haven't been as frequent lately, but they're always out there. So I do think you want to be mindful of how many dollars you hold on to. Of course, I think there's a, how does the community see that as well, right?
So are we, I mean, we were way far away from the county being willing to, hide us. So it's not like,
No, we would not have qualified.
we were never gonna be there, so that's part of the answer to those questions. Yeah, but we don't want to be in an area where we would get, welfare from the county, because we were in a way different place.
Correct.
I agree more with what Phil said, which is at some point, our residents are gonna say, yeah, how come you're taxing me every year to put in a
I mean,
piggy bank?
The board before when I got joined was very much not in favor of holding other people's savings. And that's so it got down to 10%.
Right, and we know, and now we can defend what, it happened before I got here, we can defend the plan because we just got to see what happened.
Right.
But we, okay.
And to that point, which is very legitimate and an important point, we include capital expenditures as a way of using those reserves. We plan for that so that if things aren't going to heck in a handbasket, instead of continually going and saying we need $1 million for this street repair and referendum, where it's included, so to speak, in the regular bill that everyone pays that covers a lot of capital expenditures already, which everybody needs. The streets and the sewers, et cetera, the very basic stuff. It's not being spent on. I mean, good Lord, how long have we delayed putting in, talk about crumbling infrastructure, our own police stations, accommodations for our public safety staff, and we keep delaying that. So we're not building, we're not spending for furloughs.
I would say that when you compare our fund balance to other non-home rule other home rule communities that surround us, we're fine from the standpoint of public scrutiny. There are communities that surround us that have fund balance reserves in the 60+% range. And I think, again, everybody makes decisions for themselves and they determine what's appropriate. I think as you've all articulated this evening, there is a value in making sure that you don't hold on to too much. But when situations like this year with the county take place, if we were in a situation where we had a 10% fund balance, we'd be making some very difficult decisions right now in order to get through the end of the fiscal year. Are we going to make a pension payment? Are we not? Are we going to pay debt? Are we not? Are we going to lay people off for 3 months or are we not? So again, I think when we have those conversations with the community, it's important to be mindful of the fact that emergencies happen and we all need to be mindful and responsible to have enough in the bank should something take place that's outside of our control. But the interesting piece of that is that property tax has always been the steady as she goes. You always get property tax, which is why the big recession in 08 through 10 didn't impact Glencoe in the same way that it impacted a lot of other communities. But here we are being impacted in ways that none of them are too. So
One other thing, in forecasts, so apropos to our previous conversation, adding something about golf and even calling it more than golf, because I think what I'd ideally like to see is the golf course continues to run the way the golf course runs. The greens fees pay for the course, but all the other great stuff that's coming with the new building potentially, that will be relatively new revenue to the golf course. we start to think about that as a real part of our budget. I mean, it could be a significant line item to the budget.
Yeah.
So starting to incorporate that, not necessarily for the next budget, but for the one after.
Understood.
And do we, the last question, so it's always been the golf club, you know, to their, the club of Glencoe, do we, I don't know if you have a problem with it, like, but if we take the marketing of this idea that it's gonna be a little more than just golf, you know, the way we talk about it, do we start to talk about it differently? Or is it, do we like the way it's talked about? I don't really have an opinion on that one, but just bringing it up.
Put some thought to that. There may be some value in broadening out the language a bit.
One other thing that comes to mind, and I know I sound like a broken record, but and I realize we're not gonna have a lengthy discussion about it, but all of this just drives home the need at some point, and I know now is not the time, so I'm not suggesting it is. But sometime in the next year, 2 years, we need to think seriously about asking for home rule, so that, not so that we can, to your point, even if we were home rule, we certainly wouldn't do what we're planning on doing without going to referendum. I don't think people on this board certainly would. It's not about flexing that muscle, it's to the contrary. It's about finding alternative sources of revenue, especially from people outside the community that are coming into our community to help pay for all the amenities in our community. That is what one of the real benefits of that would be for everyone, that it would help keep taxes down, not increase.
When I ran, I admitted to the, I was for home rule, I'm still for home rule. I was for home rule in 1988 or 90 or whenever it was, try it the last time. I
There's a
think
little
we should
kid
do it.
walking around there.
You know, I just had my 50th high school reunion. I wish I was a little kid, but unfortunately I was an old guy.
Thank you for your feedback. So we'll incorporate what we heard tonight. And then when we meet again next month, we'll get the whole budget all together.
In a big book.
In a big book.
Yeah, just on that note, we are working toward getting those to you on Wednesday the 9th. I think we will be. Something changes, we'll let you know, but that gives you, it's not quite a full week with it, but it's a 300-page document that I know you each commit to memory for that first meeting. So I like to give you that time. If you don't mind, we have one other quick thing. It's not on the agenda, but it relates to our donation policy that the committee put together. Sammy is someplace, there she is. And we just want to run past you a proposal relative to light the lights. And you can.
I didn't take up too much of your time. So this year, White Lights will be on November 25th, hoping to enhance the event by adding some new elements, making it a more festive experience. By doing so, we're hoping to solicit sponsorship from our local business community. Per Village's new donation policy, the Finance Committee is required to review our sponsorship opportunities and make any suggestions, give us a green light if you'd like to do so. It's important to note in 2018 and 2019, we did offer sponsorship opportunities, but that predated our donation policy. This is very similar to what we did in previous years. We just now have the requirement of bringing it to you guys for the green light. If approved, we'll start soliciting business support and participation as soon as next week. So if you guys have any feedback, questions.
Just want to make sure.
And then whose idea was this? Okay.
Where does the revenue go?
Good, add it on. That's-
Where's it go?
It's used to defray the cost of the event. So we have rental charges for a variety of different things.
Well, if we were to get sufficient, well, I guess, what does it cost to run? Can we make it, could this make it revenue neutral?
Got at least 3 or 4 large sponsors, maybe.
Good,
Yeah.
okay.
I don't know about the lights,
Well, that's a different
Yeah, not
animal
included.
altogether. Yeah,
the event itself.
yeah, it's the events.
Good, okay.
Probably not the lights.
Just in case anybody asks.
Thank you. That's all from us.
Anything else? Any other comments? Motion to, have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Do not have the regular committee. Jonathan doesn't care. 'cause he's not there.